feeling that we are not kind to what has become of our countries as a result of the kind of history that we had. I think the success of other countries, mainly the success of European countries, blinds us really to an inconvenient truth. And that truth is that there is no full safe method to stability, to political stability, and that there are no shortcuts. In fact, our situation in most African countries is that we are hostage to chance and to fortune. So what's happening in Mozambique is actually, if you like, a demonstration of what happens to a country that is trying to find its bearings in a world that it didn't build, but it was forced to live in it. So this is very, I think, what frustrates me about this is that in most analysis that are made about the violence in Mozambique, this is not taken into account. People seem to depart from the assumption that such things should not happen. And if they do happen, then it is because, I don't know, people are unwilling to live otherwise. Now, the second thing that frustrates me is that while it is true that such things should be expected to happen, and that I think we would do well to follow that kind of advice, I do think that some of these things happen in our countries because of the quality of our leadership. Now, this varies a lot in Africa, but I think it is safe to say that one of the major problems that Mozambique has been facing for the past 6 or 7 years has to do really with the quality of leadership. And I don't mean here simply the president of the country, but I mean the ruling party, so the Frelimo party, and the kinds of structures and mechanisms it has to support its president. And it so happens that it has taken a decision to put forward a president who is politically inexperienced, who has no vision, who has no sense of mission, and owing to its own organization and owing to its own political past, it has failed to bring the kind of support to him that he would need to confront the challenges that that face the country. So part of this is insurgency certainly has to do with the quality of our leadership, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Finally, the thing that frustrates me, the third thing that frustrates me in talking about the situation in Mozambique is the feeling I have, and this is borne out by facts, that the government of Mozambique is hostile to advice. It's not open to advice. It actually disregards advice. So what is particularly striking about the way the government has been managing this crisis is that it has taken the decision not to consult with researchers, with academics working on the problem, and in fact, it has been more conspicuous for actually making it hard for people to study what is going on in Cabo Delgado and to make suggestions concerning what could be done. So these three things frustrate me, and that definitely makes it very hard for me to talk about this. Now, the basic mantra in Mozambique, and mainly from the government of Mozambique, is that we are faced with Islamic terrorism. And in this short presentation, what I want to do is to basically yeah. So basically what I want to do is to disagree with that. I don't think that the violence in Mozambique is related to Islamic terrorism. I think Islamic terrorism is marginal to what is happening in Mozambique. But in order to make that argument, I will need to address what I think are the main problems, and these are basically four. So I think there's a scholarly problem. There's a political problem. There is a leadership problem, and there's also a responsibility problem, which you might also want to look at as a problem of accountability. Now, the scholarly problem is perhaps interesting for those of you who are researchers and academics, because it is about the weaknesses of the way in which we carry out social science research in Africa. And in my more methodological work, I describe these weaknesses as the over-reliance on what I call analytical demons and stylized facts. And just briefly, analytical demons are basically a set of beliefs that we have, and we think that give us enough information to make sense of whatever phenomenon that we are interested in. So you will see, for example, that the violence in Mozambique, the account of the violence there is basically similar to the account of violence in Mali, in Nigeria, actually everywhere where there is violence in Africa. So it's basically this idea that it's marginalized youth, people who have lost out in terms of economic development, who have taken up arms against the state. Now, that is an analytical demon because it fails to consider alternative explanations. And in fact, it ignores them, and in looking for data to work on, to analyze, it tends to rely on basically the kinds of accounts that would strengthen the researcher's belief in his or her own assumptions. And so, for example, one will basically only pay attention to the fact that it's mainly young people fighting. One will pay attention to the fact that those young people may be claiming that they profess the Islamic religion and that kind of thing. Now, what destroys that kind of argument, of course, is that if that were the case, Cabo Delgado would not be the only place in Mozambique where there would be violence. There are other places in Mozambique where the youth are marginalized, where they have no hope for the future, where some economic activity is taking place, and where the people are really disaffected, and yet there is no violence. And I find it outrageous that those researchers who put out these kinds of accounts into the world actually do not care to look into into that very simple fact. So I come from a province in Mozambique, Gaza, which is close to South Africa, where there's a region where there are diamonds, and there's a lot of illegal activity going on there. There is some violence between those illegal miners and authorities, but it has not taken the proportions that you see in Cabo Delgado. I did research in northern province, central province, Tete, close to Zimbabwe and Zambia, where there is also coal extraction. People have been forcibly removed, and there's no violence. At any rate, not to the same extent that you would have in Cabo Delgado. So there's a problem there. And I think that's something that we always need to take into account when we try to understand what's going on in Mozambique. Now, this is not to say that we should rule out completely the claim that the violence might have something to do with economic circumstances and with marginalization. Of course, there's an element of that. All I'm trying to say to you is that we need to be careful about all the stages that need to be considered for us to be comfortable in our belief that we have got an explanation. And one of those things that we would have to do would be, for example, to make a distinction between, feeling disaffected, deciding to be violent, plucking up the courage to take up arms and fight over a long period of time, and also seek a justification of that violence from some kind of ideological background or religious background. So these are different stages in the analytical process which are not taken into account, and they are simply conflated into a serviceable account. I think the other thing that we also need to consider is that ISIS, which is the promoter of Islamic terrorism in the world, actually operates like a franchise, like a McDonald's or Burger King, or even like a Pentecostal, or these evangelical churches. Maybe some of them, the Brazilian ones, that they operate like franchises. That is, you can go to them to acquire their paraphernalia, and with that, give yourself an identity without necessarily subscribing to whatever goals they might have. And I think an element of that is present in Mozambique. In fact, there are clear indications that there was some ISIS involvement from 2019 onwards, but that was after the violence had been there basically for almost 3 years. So I think the other thing one needs to take into account in the scholarly consideration of what's going on there is the process of escalation, which again is not looked at. This violence started small, but it started all of a sudden in 2017 with an attack against police headquarters, police station. And at the time when that was reported, news media, everybody was shocked, and everybody assumed it was just, a single incident. None of the researchers at the time entertained the thought that that might have been, if you like, the crystallization of a process that had been simmering underground for a long time. And that what was simmering there was not necessarily religious. It was just the failure of the Mozambican political system to accommodate people who think differently about how the country should be run, and mostly how local affairs should be run. And that takes me actually to the second problem I have, and that is the political problem. That is the inability of the Mozambican political system to respond to local grievances. And that renders the Mozambican political system actually vulnerable. And that is what we see. The system is too centralized for the capacity of the state actually to deliver. We don't have that capacity, but the ruling party and basically all political elites are committed to the idea that they can do everything, everywhere, anytime, and that local initiative is a threat to the prerogative of power that central authorities have. And so there is no sense that it might be wise, when you have to run a country under those circumstances, it might be wise to be open to the idea of looking for political solutions to anything that might appear like a threat to the sovereignty of the country. So the system always responds to any kind of grievance and to any kind of search for autonomy and freedom, emancipation. It responds to that by seeking to control more, right? And I think this leads to a situation that can actually encourage people to rebel. So basically, the police, the army, the courts, every kind of authority in Mozambique responds in a repressive manner to anything. And this is what happened in Cabo Delgado. People, especially business people, local business elites, people from different political countries, parties, they wanted more space to do their things. And the response of the authorities was heavy-handed. So actually, the way that the state responded to local grievances, not marginalization, gave some people no other option than actually to resort to violence against the state. And that's not new in the Mozambican political system. We had a long civil war, 16 years of civil war. Of course, that was related to the problem we had of apartheid in your country. But a major factor in the civil war that we had in Mozambique was the inability of the political system to respond to local grievances. I've seen this happening. I said earlier on that I did research in Tete, in mining communities. And what I see there is exactly the same thing. The state responding in a heavy-handed manner to local and legitimate grievances. And it's actually, miraculous that people there are not taking arms to fight against the state. Then we come to the problem of leadership, and the problem here is mainly the party, the political party, but it is also the president that we have. We have a president who has shown time and again that he is incompetent. He's not up to the job. This is just too much for him. He has no vision, he has no mission, he has no clue. You know, there are several reasons I can put forward here to make that point. I mean, he's a politically inexperienced person. He is no politician. He had no political ambition. And he was put forward as Frelimu's presidential candidate for internal reasons within Frelimu. So when he came into office, he had no idea what he wanted to do. He had no resources, no intellectual resources, no political resources to draw from to chart his way through, you know, a difficult gauntlet that had been thrown at him. Nobody knows. I mean, I don't know what he stands for. I don't know if he's a Republican. I don't know if he is a liberal. I don't know if he's a Marxist. I don't know what he is. And I don't think that in modern times, you can run a country without a clear political profile. He does not understand that policy making is not just defining goals, you know, where you want to be. It is also working out the measures that you want to put in place to achieve those goals. But most importantly, it is about creating conditions for those measures to be effective. He's got no clue about this. Everything he has done since he's been in power has demonstrated that he's just out of place. And so it's actually not surprising that he was not able to contain the violence that came his way. He did not create it. You know, it could always happen to anybody, but it started very small and it became, you know, it came out of control to such a point that now we have foreign troops in Mozambique dealing, you know, with an army that is not an army. It's just young men who are putting up this fight against a thoroughly disorganized army and police force in Mozambique. So the fourth point is the point about responsibility and accountability. And this is perhaps the most painful one for me, because it is really about a culture, a political culture that we have nurtured in Mozambique since independence that is so hostile to human dignity. Political elites just don't care about the suffering of people. And what I mean by that is that it's very easy for a politician like the president and his ministers, very easy for him to send 300 young men who are barely trained properly, to just send them to the theater of war, to learn that they died, that they were all killed within a matter of days, and not even inform their parents. You know, such things have happened since this conflict started. So what this means is what? It is that, you know, if you don't have a sense of responsibility, if you don't think that when such things happen, you should face the people and tell them what's going on and apologize, you are not likely to be able to deal with a problem like that one. So when that first attack took place in 2017, the chief of the police, you know, he came to the news and he said, we will sort this out in 3 days. And as we know, they didn't. And he is still the chief of police. He's still there. The same person who said he would solve the problem in 3 days. He's still there. So no accountability at all. We know that the security forces have engaged in human rights violations, perhaps not to the same scale that we have heard in the news, but these things are happening. And the reaction of the political elites is actually to ignore and to downplay such accusations. The president hired mercenary groups. He did not ask anyone. I mean, he did not ask Parliament for that. He did not make any announcement to the country concerning that. 2 mercenary groups. Nobody knows where he got the money from, because, as you know, we don't have money in Mozambique. And still he hired 2 mercenary groups, and he has not been held accountable for that. We have these Rwandan troops in Mozambique, 1,000 of them. We don't know what promises he made to the dictator of Rwanda. We don't know how much money he promised him or the French, what participation he promised them in the, in natural resource exploitation. We don't know anything, right? Now, a system that operates in this manner is not one that is likely to be able to contain challenges to the sovereignty of the state. And challenges which at first do not come as challenges, but simply as people seeking to articulate their grievances. So let me finish here by saying the following. I think that the idea that we are facing Islamic terrorism in Mozambique is functional to a clueless political leadership. I think it's more appropriate to approach the violence in Mozambique not as an instance of Islamic terrorism, but rather as what happens when a political system is weak. And I'm not talking here about weak statehood and the kinds of things that social scientists like to talk about. I'm simply focusing on one variable, and that variable is political leadership. So when the political leadership is weak, it will always be vulnerable to challenges, and through its response, it will actually create conditions for local grievances to grow into something completely different and perhaps even more menacing. I think it is quite significant that it took the president of Mozambique 4 years to come to the fore and tell the country that there's violence in Cabo Delgado. 4 years it took him to do that. I think that says everything that we need to know about what's going on in Mozambique. So I hope this is okay as an introduction, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks a lot, Prof. That was excellent and succinct presentation and take on the Mozambican situation. We have a question from Michael, and he's asking you, what in your view would be the future of the populace with regards to lack of nationalism and lack of current government to secure its sovereignty? And then yeah, but I think that is the main question.
Well, that's a bit like crystal ball glazing. I don't have an answer to that. We are falling into a situation in Mozambique where violence might become an attractive option to respond to the inability of the state to be responsive to people. So, I would not be surprised if what's happening in Cabo Delgado started happening in other parts of the country because, we do not have a political culture that fosters the search for political solutions to problems that are brought to the attention of the political system. And there are many hotspots in Mozambique, and that's actually a horror scenario. But I think that it's one to take seriously into account.
Okay, you mentioned, for example, the question of the president taking a unilateral decision to hire mercenaries. So there is a question from Asakon asking whether or not there is a protocol that the president could follow before he could take such decisions.
Yeah,
the parliament or the cabinet.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's actually not clear whether the president is under any obligation to do that. So I think that it would be possible for him to appeal to that lack of clarity to justify his unilateral decision. But as I'm saying, this is a legal point, and it is an unclear legal point. I think, however, that judging from what is entailed in the whole thing, it would be probably wrong to think that he could do this without consulting with the appropriate bodies within the political system of Mozambique. Because at least one thing that would undermine that argument is that there's money involved, and the government is required by law to seek permission from Parliament for expenses that were not foreseen in the budget that was discussed and approved in Parliament. And it's clear that the money that was used to hire the mercenaries was not budgeted. So simply out of that reason, he would have been under the obligation to approach Parliament. So that's one side of the thing. The other side of the thing is, this is about being sensible as a politician. You are running a country which is facing a major problem. You want the country to be behind you. You want the society to be behind you. You cannot afford not to speak to the people about what you're doing, about what you intend to do. So even if, in the unlikely event that there was some kind of legal safeguard for him to do that, there would still be this, for me, decisive point about, simply being politically sensible and do the right thing. And the right thing is always that which, helps promote responsibility and accountability. And especially when you know that the country is now in the grips of a financial scandal that was the result of doing things, hidden away from those before whom people should be held accountable. Especially because of that, we should be careful today not to do things in that way.
Okay, we have another question. Now, but let me just preface the question because it's coming from Tato. Now, in Africa, I mean, African countries, former liberation movements, you find that they still enjoy good support, although in other countries they win with a declining support or declining vote. So Tato is asking, what is the state of political oppositions in Mozambique who can provide an alternative to Frelimo? Especially in the context of.
Yeah, I think the tragedy in Mozambique is that the only alternative, the only viable alternative right now, and perhaps for the foreseeable future, can only be found within Frelimo itself and not outside of Frelimo. This is not to say that there are no opposition parties. There are, but quite weak. And I think one of the things that makes these opposition parties weak is precisely, it's the same thing that is destroying the Frelimo party. It's lack of a vision, it's lack of a mission, it's lack of a political profile, right? So I think it's fair to say, or it's not unfair to say, that these are just politicians who are politicians for the sake of being politicians, not for the sake of serving some goal that goes beyond their, immediate personal individual interests. So that's a problem. And what that leads to is also to a situation where institutions are also undermined. So in particular, for example, the judiciary, which could somehow serve as a balance, a counterbalance. We don't have that. So like, I envy you in South Africa, that you have an incredibly stable and good justice system. And, if you did not have the kinds of courts that you have right now in South Africa, I don't know where your country would be today, owing to the kinds of problems that the ANC and the other parties seem to be displaying. So at least you have that safeguard in South Africa. We don't in Mozambique. And so that's, yeah, that's hopeless.
Oyama basically asked the same questions as Tata, so I'll just skip and then go to Gaugelo. The question is, what can other stakeholders, such as NGOs, regional institutions, youth movements, think tanks, do to deal with conflicts, which the government seems to be failing in addressing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they have to continue doing what they are doing. I mean, it's not like people are, sitting helplessly around doing nothing. There are civil society groups in Mozambique that have been campaigning for the issues to be discussed in public. They have been asking uncomfortable questions concerning some of the issues that I mentioned here, like hiring mercenary groups. They want to know where the government got the money from. So you have groups doing that. You have groups asking questions about human rights violations. You have journalists researching and reporting on that. And I think that this is what people should continue doing. This is what I do myself. I write, I participate in public discussions in Mozambique. I write to newspapers. I participate in TV shows. And whenever I do that, I raise these issues as well. And that's what we should do. Whether that will help, I cannot tell. I cannot tell. Just think that that's all we can do for the time being.
Okay, colleagues and students, are there any more questions? All right, Prof. So in the context of the 4 problems or challenges that you mentioned in Mozambique, I mean, scholarly, political, leadership, responsibility, and accountability. What lessons can we specifically here in South Africa and other countries in the SADC region? I know you mentioned the durability of our judicial system, but things could go wrong. I mean, say, God forbid, the constitution were to be amended by, the ANC or whoever is in power at the time. What lessons can we draw from the Mozambican situation?
Yeah. But I think the main lesson that you can draw from the Mozambican situation, other than counting your blessings, really, is to be happy that you have a strong judiciary, and that this institution should be nurtured, further strengthened. Right, this might be your lifeline. But also, you see, you are also fortunate to have a political party in power, the ANC, which has experienced dissent and has survived it. What that means is that what the ANC has gone through, for example, the way that Mbeki had to step down, the way that some people created their own parties from within the ANC, what that has done to the ANC is to perhaps show to political leaders that a political party is not defined by unanimity, that a political party is defined by its ability to argue, to discuss, and to accommodate those who think differently. And I think that this is perhaps, I did not mention it specifically, but I think this is Mozambique's main weakness right now, that Mozambique is ruled by a country that does not have a culture of debate, right? There are many people within the ruling party who are not happy with the way the country is being run, but they would never come forward and say it. they would rather watch than do anything. And this is not only because they are being opportunistic. Maybe they are hoping to be appointed to some office, or maybe they are afraid because things might happen to them, and things do happen, unfortunately. From time to time, there's violence against people who raise their voice. So, it's just that people are not used to seeing themselves as, independent individuals within a collective organization that the party is, and therefore that they have the right and that they can say what they think without being seen as people who are hostile to the party. If you look at Frelimo Party publications, to its programs and to everything that it puts out, you will see that one word which is never absent is the word unity. It's everything is about unity. It's unity all the time, and so that leads to a sclerosis of the party. And so most of the problems that the party has, it's an inability to give support to its own leader, who is obviously weak, who's obviously clueless. The inability to support him just shows how problematic this culture is. And I don't think that you face that danger in South Africa, owing to your recent history. Fortunately so. It might have been like that in South Africa because, the ANC, like all liberation movements in Africa, they have an authoritarian political tradition. The ANC was fortunate to take power in a country where there were institutions that somehow were able to accommodate those who thought differently from those who are in power. So probably what you really have to learn from Mozambique is to cherish what you have. I can't hear you, your microphone.
So I've muted myself. So I'm just saying this has been a wonderful discussion. I think an excellent set of questions from our students. So I should really like to thank you for having participated in this 4-day seminar series. So just to make a note to our students, this was day 3 of 4 seminars. So tomorrow is our last one. Ms. Sanusha Naidu will give a South African perspective on the Mozambican situation. So yeah, Prof, I don't know if you have any last words before we wrap it up.
No, thank you. Just to thank you for the invitation and for listening to me and the great questions.
Oh, thanks, Jason.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Bye.